Noelle talked to him for a long time. She continued to tell him that what he was doing was only going to hurt himself in the end. She told him that curiosity was fine, but his obsession would only end in a disaster. She had seen this happen before. Noelle had been on the island for a long time, you see. She had been on the island longer than anyone aside from a young girl named Rachel. Noelle had seen many friends that lasted a lifetime. She had also seen many pain-filled instances with consequences take place. Out of anyone, she knew about all the myths and legends of the island. Noelle knew what she was talking about. Obsessing over something that's better left forgotten would truly just hurt Garrett. She tried to explain all that to him, but you know what they say. Curiosity killed the cat. In this story, Garrett was our cat. Death would be going too far, and death was definitely not the consequence here. But something very painful would be received for his fixation. Noelle knew the day was coming, she felt it inside, and so did James. The ties to the people in the island are much deeper than what many think. The connection of the people on the island are much stronger than what many know. Another month went by, and Garrett was torn in two. He loved James and Noelle. He loved them with his whole heart. I'm sure if he knew how, he'd have given James and Noelle the crimson sand himself. Another myth. If the sand is given to you, you can't give any back. The only people who haven't received the sand can give it. James and Noelle beat Garrett to the giving. Garrett still would have given them the sand in a heartbeat at the time. He just didn't know how. Just because his mind was going crazy about what it had suppressed didn't mean he stopped loving his two best friends. He would still die for them, still do anything in the world for them. This is why he was so torn. He took in Noelle's warnings to heart more than she thought he had. He knew something terrible may happen if he forced himself to remember it all. Noelle constantly reminded him of this. Parts of him wanted to just drop the fact that he had forgotten anything. Drop it all and just move on. But the other part of him couldn't, and that part of him was eating his insides alive. His mind continued to wander and wander. He just knew from what James and Noelle had told him that he must have forgotten something awful. So you must be thinking of why he would want to remember such a thing. To be honest, everyone's different. Maybe it's a pride thing. Maybe it's a self-dignity thing. The knowing that something awful happened to you and you're not sure what leaves a lot of questions to float around. Some can just let it go, and others can't. No matter how much Garrett wished that he could be one of the ones to let it go, Garrett couldn't let it go. His wish from the crimson sand that Noelle and James had given him was beginning to pop into his mind. More than once, that one wish came to his thoughts. Another 2 months went by, and Garrett still stared off into the ocean at night. His hands were now usually tight in his pockets, holding on to the vial of crimson sand. Noelle and James began to look and feel worse. Over the past few weeks, Noelle had become bedridden. Slowly, her and James were growing to look more and more skeletal. This worried Garrett. He spent most of his days watching over the two of them, and he did everything he could for them. But at night, he still went back to the ocean to ponder things. Overall, nothing could take it all away. His thoughts and obsessions were still there. One night, the ocean waves began to pick up. As usual, Garrett was staring off into the horizon. He gazed off into the crystal waters, watching the sun finish its setting. James had made his way down the paved hill through the fluffy sand and found himself standing next to Garrett. Garrett was shocked. He hadn't expected to see James out this late, or even out of bed at all for that matter. Garrett quickly ran to his side and helped James stand. Before Garrett could even ask what was wrong, James began to let tears fill his eyes. He didn't understand any of this. He tried so hard to stick up for Garrett, condone what he was doing, but he couldn't anymore. Confronting Garrett was the only thing he could do. He confessed to Garrett that it made no sense to him. Garrett had everything he needed. He had the friendship the island knew he required and desired. But Garrett was slowly throwing it away. He was not only throwing it away, but throwing it away for something he couldn't remember. Something that wasn't worth remembering at all. James explained this all to him, and Garrett knew it was true. He was left speechless. All Garrett could really do was hug James. He couldn't think to do anything else. He wanted to apologize and to cry. He was so split in two, and it was tearing him apart. Something he wanted so bad was to just remember. To him, it was next to unbearable. But the most important thing that he would never forget was that what he so desired to recall was nothing worth remembering at all. Garrett walked James home and helped him lay in his bed. Worry filled both of their eyes as Garrett left James' house. That same night, he stopped by Noelle's shack to see how she was doing. He laid his eyes on her and instantly knew something serious was happening. Noelle just smiled. She never seemed shocked by anything, nor did she seem to ever blame Garrett for anything. She really cared for him. She closed her eyes as she laid there, and Garrett sat at the foot of her bed. He asked her why she and James had gotten so sick. He felt it was more than just a coincidence. The more he asked, the more he feared for them both. She just shook her head and said she was fine. She followed it by asking how Garrett was. He so much just wanted to hear how she was doing. She and James both looked so ill, it was too painful to see. Noelle was a hard-headed girl, though. Garrett knew this. Even if she was doing awfully, she would never admit to it. She'd take it to her grave that she was fine. He was silent. I just want to know what happened, Noelle. Noelle sat there for a long time. She knew she couldn't say anything to change his mind. She had seen it once, she had seen it 1,000 times. It broke her heart to see it again, especially to one of her friends this time. She lowered her eyes, trying to hide the tears that were falling. She knew Garrett would remember his tragedy, and she knew he'd regret it forever. Garrett walked over and knelt by her bed. He kissed her on the forehead and told her he wouldn't go anywhere. That he would just use his wish to remember. He'd remember, and they'd go about their days happy as can be. He said he'd stay by their side and keep them safe to make sure they got better. Garrett could just remember and be with his friends, happily ever after. Things just don't work that way. Not when it comes to remembering what the island helped you forget. Garrett pulled out the vial of sand from his pocket and smiled to Noelle. He popped off the top. Wish me luck. He smiled as he began to pour the crimson sand out, making his wish. He knew so little. Noelle just smiled as the sand poured. Her eyes closed as the life poured out of her body. She was gone. Across town, James lowered his head in acceptance at what Garrett had done. As he breathed his last breath, he prayed that Garrett would be okay. The legend of the crimson sand says the sand is crimson for a reason. They say that the sand takes its color from the life of the giver of the sand. The giver loves a person so much that they pour their heart and soul into a small vial of sand. Thus, the sand gets its rich, blood-like color. They also say that if getting the sand alone isn't enough, then when they make that wish, it takes the life out of the giver. It's strange how things work on the islands. In a way, it all really does make sense. If someone pours their heart and soul into another person, and that other person isn't satisfied with just being accepted and loved, the person pouring out their heart gets drained. Some people just never realize what they have until it's left them. They never realize that what they have is just exactly what they need. It's sad when a person realizes too late. I know that Garrett surely had no idea what he was doing when he made that wish. If he had, I know he would have never used his sand. Garrett loved his friends with no end. If he knew they were dying, I know he would have stopped it all and just let the past go. Sadly, it wasn't till after all the sand had been poured out that he realized what he had done. Before he even had a chance to wonder why, the island disappeared. Garrett got his wish. Faster than the grain of sand falling, Garrett found himself laying on a lumpy mattress. He looked around, finding a familiar ceiling above him. The clock on his wall still read 3 a.m. His body began to shake as it had done before. No matter how hard he tried, the shaking didn't subside. He began to cry. His stomach began to develop knots from out of nowhere. He knew exactly where he was and recalled every bit of it. Only this time, he remembered leaving behind his island and losing the only true friends he'd ever have. That next day came, and Garrett wished that the days would just end. Could you honestly expect different? After receiving something as wonderful as Noelle and James, a friend that truly love you for you, then watch them die over an obsession you couldn't get over, you'd want to die from your own wish. Garrett wished that now. He wished those crimson sands would have taken his life. He wished that he would have realized what he was doing before he had done it. He wished he wasn't so stupid. Then it hit him. Wishes, wishes, wishes. Garrett just kept wishing. Wishes are what got him there in the first place. Why not just be happy with what he had? I know. You're thinking the same thing we all are. You'd be wishing you were dead too. Wishing you would have made a different choice. It's another tragedy, losing the ones you love over an obsession. But Garrett realized something. No, he realized a lot of things. Noelle was completely right. You can't wish your life away, and you can't live your life obsessing over things you want most. It's okay to dream. Dreaming and wanting things is one thing, but turning those dreams into things you obsess on is something completely different. Most of all, Garrett realized that some things are better left unknown. Realizing this didn't take the pain away. I so wish it did. A hard lesson learned, almost too harsh. Another chance would be nice, even wonderful. Rather than wishing for it, Garrett closed his eyes and drifted back to sleep, alone.